You're listening to The Paul Higgins Show, where ambitious tech consultants come to unlock their potential. After 18 years as a global leader, I launched several businesses, culminating in a successful exit. I'm sharing what I learned, plus what's working now from mentoring tech consultants. You will hear leaders within our industry to help you build a business you love that allows you to do what you want. If you are looking for immediate cash flow wins to fuel your growth, go to our free ebook at paulhigginsmentoring.com/roadmap. Imagine you're buried in delivery and you know that you need to grow your business, but you desperately need a team to help you do that, but you just can't afford it. You've been burned in the past by experts and you're really trapped. You're not quite sure where to go. What if I told you there was another way? Hi, I'm Paul and welcome to the Paul Higgins Show, episode 589. And today I talk to John Munsell from Bizzuka.com, Bizzuka. And you're going to learn a lot about AI, but three key things that you're going to get. One is the top mistakes to avoid as a tech consultant for AI. The second is some brilliant ways to use AI around business proposals. You'll be absolutely blown away. And the third is how to become an AI first business. John is the CEO of Bizzuka, as I said. It's an Inc. 5000 company that helps businesses implement an AI strategy that enables them to do two things that we all love: save money and save time. John has helped over 600 business leaders scale their operations in just the past year, utilizing his innovative AI strategy canvas and scalable prompt engineering methods. And he also helps top universities with using AI in their curriculum for students. So he's both on an academic and also a practical perspective. He also sold his business, and now he's really focused on artificial intelligence because he knows it is the future, and that's what he's going to give you. John is passionate about helping companies scale across AI with their organizations and really taking it to the next level. And John is absolutely at the forefront of this, and he's going to save you hours and hours of research by listening or watching John on our YouTube channel, paulhigginsmentoring.com. So what I'll do now is hand you over to John Munsell from Bizzuka.com. Fantastic to have you here, John.
I'm great. It's great to be on your show. I really appreciate all you're doing, and it's a privilege to be here. So thanks.
Yeah, well, I heard you on Mike Stelzner's podcast, which is AI Explored and podcast. So if you haven't listened to that episode of John, certainly do it. We'll have the link in the show notes. But really inspired me to get you on and share your knowledge around AI, which is, how lucky are we to tell our grandchildren or tell others that, we're at that time when it really took off, whether it's 2022, 23. That's when the world changed forever, and I think you're going to show that it's the positive side of it today. But why don't we kick off with who you love to help with AI, and what are some of the challenges that they face that you help them to solve?
Oh, great question. So I work with businesses, basically, whether they're small businesses or large enterprises. I work with them all. The problem that I help them solve is one of getting their entire organization to understand AI from the same level so they can execute better. We call it scalable prompting or scalable prompt engineering. And we also, you've probably heard the phrase bandied about an AI first culture. So that's the idea. It's hard as an organization to actually have an AI first culture if everybody is going about it independently. Everybody's self-taught. And that just creates more chaos. It doesn't create efficiency. And so that's the problem that I solve for businesses. I help them come at it from where everybody has the same understanding of AI, how it operates, and how to create prompts that are shareable and scalable throughout the organization.
Yeah, look, I think, and, I even see it in our team. We've got a small team, 5 people, but even I sort of got on my blazing horse and went at 1,000,000 miles an hour at it, and then I forgot that I'd left my team behind. And the problem with that is that I was doing a lot of things that I shouldn't be doing. can do, but shouldn't, right? It was, we're recording this in December of 24, but it sort of dawned upon me like, I have not brought them along in this journey, right? I'm sort of giving them the outputs of it, but I'm not getting them to actually do the work. And then the other thing is, I wouldn't bring the AI into the meeting. Like, I'd have all the prompts, and we'll go into more detail about that, but I'd have all the prompts, and I use Claude predominantly. So I'd use all my projects set up, but we weren't using that in our meetings, right? It was sort of like
Mm.
separate. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, I've got this brilliant virtual employee, and they're not actually even in the conversation. So that's been my personal experience. What are you seeing more from the smaller end, and certainly where the owner and the founder is sort of the leader of the business? What are some of the challenges around that you're seeing?
Man, it depends on the size of the organization. Strangely enough, I find that the larger the organization, the more likely that senior management is not using AI.
Right.
And they've got individuals on the workforce that are. And so now they're kind of like, oh, I better figure this out if I'm supposed to lead the charge. And so we developed a program specifically for those business leaders to help them really understand it, but then to allow them to go back down to the workforce that's using it and saying, okay, guys, let's all get on the same page, right? Because in the smaller organizations like yours and like mine, the owner is kind of taking off on it. Might be somebody in marketing taking off on it, might be somebody in HR playing around with it, bookkeeping or whatever. But everybody's teaching themselves, and it's like you say, you're not taking anybody along the ride, right? And what you're doing is so common where, I mean, heck, it's what I did, right? I'm just kind of teaching myself. We started off, I don't know, almost 4 years ago now. I think it was with Copy AI and then with Jasper, and I was looking at it, I was like, this thing just talks in circles. I mean, it's a great head start, but I have so much editing I have to do. It wasn't any fun. And I didn't want to bring anybody along on that journey because it was a mess, right? And
Yes.
then I eventually brought a couple people in marketing on. I said, okay, y'all play around with this, but it'll give you a head start. But just keep in mind it talks in circles. But then when ChatGPT came out, I was like, oh, it's not talking in circles. I can make this thing do a lot more. It's like they took the guardrails off, right?
Yes.
In
Yes.
Jasper and the earlier versions, it was called Jarvis back then, I believe. It was kind of like bowling when you have those guardrails up and you keep your ball in. It takes the fun out of it. But the bottom line is when you really are using it like you are, you don't have time to just bring everybody else along and teach them and all that stuff. You just figure it out. And what I did is I joined a few mastermind groups where everybody was kind of figuring it out. But I noticed a specific style that a fella had written, and he was using it to help guide ChatGPT at the time to write direct response copy. And that was the first time I saw variables, and I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." And so at that point, I started to use variables. And the minute I started to use variables and what we now call prompt containers and prompt sequences, I knew at that point, okay, if I could teach this to everybody else in our organization, we're all going to go a whole lot faster. And so that's kind of what I did. I kind of developed it further and further and further because, we needed it, right? Because we were a small team. At one point, I had 40 people, but I sold off the agency back,
Yes.
I don't know, almost 3 years ago to focus on AI. So we went from 40 down to four.
Yes.
So I needed them to act like they were 15,
Yes.
right? So that was how I did it. But no, I know what you're talking about because I did it too. But I was fortunate enough to stumble across a process, and that process is what really changed the game.
Great. And we'll come back to the variables and the prompt containers in a moment, because I think that's really interesting. And I also would like to talk about, how we're talking before we went to live to air. It's sort of like you as an individual, it's your team, and then you've got your clients, right? So how do you sort of take that as a journey, which is one that I know myself I'm going through. But you see a lot of small businesses, and if Now, you listening to John, that's who we are. We run a small business predominantly, right? What are some of the mistakes that you see people making with AI? One we've already talked about, which is, keeping it all of themselves and not making it broader. But what else do you see as the common mistakes people make with the
Oh
AI?
man, yeah, there's so many of them, and it's funny because I'm not impervious to making mistakes. I make plenty of them, which brings me to one of the mistakes people make is not sharing your mistakes. Right? When you make a mistake with AI, it would be good if you would tell everybody else, "Hey, don't do this." Right? Like for instance, I was watching somebody. I guess it was yesterday or the day before. They're in the training space, the AI training space, and they kept reiterating that the first thing you do is tell the AI what role it's playing. And so you say, you are a such and such. And you don't do that every time, right? So that's a big mistake because everybody thinks, oh, I've been told to to give it a role, tell it what role it is,
Yes.
describe the role.
Yes.
It depends on what you're trying to do.
Yes.
But at some point, you have to not use the role because you have to understand how AI works. I mean, AI is basically schooled on the world's knowledge. And so if you tell it, okay, you're a chemical engineer, well, inherent with that role itself is a lot of assumptions that AI is making, right?
Yes.
It's making assumptions of how it analyzes something. It's making assumptions as to how it speaks. It's making assumptions as to the complexity of the sentence structure, right? It's making all kinds of assumptions just because you said you are a chemical engineer. You flavor that with you're the world's greatest chemical engineer. And you're going to get a whole different set of results. Now, if your goal is to get some deep analysis done, then by all means use that role. But if your role is to write a paper or a blog post and you happen to be, I don't know, talking about some sort of chemistry, you don't want to give it that role
Yes.
because it'll write in a way that's too complicated. And you get up what we call prompt conflict. So you're trying to tell it to write one way, but you've told it to behave in a way that conflicts with what you're trying to, with the style you're trying to write. That's a big one that we make. Probably, if I were going to nail the biggest one is not giving the proper context up front. And the biggest context that people forget about is who are they talking to? Who is your target audience? But
Yes.
it's not just saying, oh, our target audience is CEOs of companies that are doing 1 to 50 million in revenue. It's not that. It's way deeper than that. We have, for instance, 20 different, call them variables, on a prompt, just on a prompt that pulls out all kinds of psychological background information on our target persona. And it really describes our persona's pains, problems, frustrations, mistaken beliefs, things they've tried that didn't work, the path they go down to make a decision. We created something that we call the expanded buyer's journey, and we solve for every step along that buyer's journey. Instead of it being a 5-step thing, it's about a 12-step thing,
Yes.
starting with symptoms, going all the way through evangelism. But anyway, when you have that level of detail and you provide it to the AI and you just use a simple request, what it'll give you is incredibly different. It's so much more powerful and potent. So I think that's the biggest one because people they either don't tell it who the persona is
Yes.
or they only give it a couple of things, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Look, I agree. And no matter what, there's so many different Chrome extensions tools. I use one called Copy History. But what I
Mm-hmm.
do is have shortcuts or for specific for the detail of the ICP. Because what I often find people
Gotcha.
doing is they're recreating the wheel. That's what I found, right? Whereas now I've got, a shortcut, I use ZICP and bang, my ICP with all of that detail fits in. So I think, using and saving it and then reapplying it, I think helps a lot. Whereas
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it gets confused like it should if you change your mind every time that you've got a slightly different ICP or a different lens on the
Yeah.
ICP, etc.
Yeah.
So I think sharing your mistakes, making sure that you use role, but role in the right context. It's not
Mhm.
always a boring default. And the third thing is around that context and really making sure that it's clear for you and three big mistakes to avoid. So if you're making those mistakes, certainly John's giving you some brilliant ways of getting around that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'll give you one more,
yeah,
and
sure.
that's the writing style. Because a lot of these AI tools these days, they give you a couple of buttons to push, right into casual voice, right? In a detailed voice, right? In an
Yes.
analytical voice, whatever it is. That's kind of like giving it the role. You're now letting the GPT or the LLM dictate the entire style around a single word. And that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yes.
We calibrate it differently. So we have a set of variables and we have like, I don't know, 56 or so, but we only use a handful depending on what we're trying to write. So that way we can kind of leverage it up. Like for instance, I always use the one called humor. We have certain variables that we just go from a scale of 0 to 10. So if I
Yes.
tell it to use humor equals 0, well, don't use humor. If I tell it to use 10, it'll get kind of crazy on you unless I've told it that it's a certified public accountant. Then all of a sudden, the, it'll either be humorless or have some really stupid dad jokes in there. Those are the things where people need to learn how to do their own calibration. I'll give you a quick example. We had one of the gals in our mastermind group. She had created a chatbot, and the chatbot was for ophthalmology clinics, and it was an internal chatbot on an internal LLM, and it was designed to be a role playing assistant in sales onboarding to
Yes.
teach people how to sell ophthalmology services, right? So it was a really clever implementation. She hops on our office hours call and says, John, I need your help. I'm like, okay, what's up? She goes, I can't get my chatbot to stop talking like a pirate. And I was like, a pirate? How does that happen?
Yeah.
And I like, you serious? Like a real pilot. She goes, yeah, it just keeps saying stuff like ahoy, matey, and R and all that stuff. I'm like, oh no. So I said, bring it up. Let's take a look at it. And sure enough, it did. I said, okay, well, let me look at your prompts. I look at the prompts and she had gotten away from the framework. So she stopped calibrating and went back into a sentence structure prompt, which is, I want you to talk like this and speak a little that way and speak a little this way. And what she had was that prompt conflict that I was telling you about. She said she gave it a role over here, but over here, way down in the paragraph structure, which is why we're kind of anti-paragraph for the most part, I would say we still use them, but she had a sentence that said something like, I want you to use a little bit of humor, kind of like that funny uncle. And so what did that do? Well, it told the GPT that it was an uncle. What's an uncle? An uncle is talking to children,
Yes.
right? So there's all those assumptions built into that single word. Funny to an uncle to a child, apparently, according to ChatGPT, is talking like a pirate.
There you
I
go.
don't know.
Yeah. And the bit that I find a little confusing because, I know and we'll talk platform for role, but I use, predominantly Claude for, 90%, which for me, a lot of
Yeah.
it is content, right? So that's what I use Claude for. But I know that, and I use Claude projects and I load as much of my knowledge. The brilliant thing is we use Fathom. You might be using whatever recorder you are.
Yep.
You got a huge amount of content that you can then upload to give it the some context. But where I get a
Yeah.
little confused is how much now Claude tells you also to, you can create your personal style. It's like, well, I can create my personal style, but then I've got all my knowledge base that's uploading, which is really me. So
Mhm.
how do I use those two things? I'm sort of like on training wheels in that area. I wonder,
Yeah.
your thoughts or experiences on that.
Yeah, look, we all talk in different voices. To say you have a style is kind of a misnomer, right? Because I have a style if I'm talking to shareholders. I have a style if I'm writing a press release. I have a style if I'm talking to you on a Zoom call. I got a style if I'm talking to, a child, right? So there's a different tone that you use in different circumstances. in Claude, yeah, I have John's casual voice, I have John's whatever voice. In ChatGPT, I have what is called a style container, and in our
Yes.
prompt library, I go, okay, this is John's email voice, this is John's blog writing voice and stuff. So I have all those different styles already calibrated and shareable. But it's interesting. I use Claude extensively, right? I'm like you. I have loads of projects. Have you ever tapped one out, to where it says, okay, you can't add any more data
Oh
in
yeah.
there? Like
Oh, yeah.
the one that I'm doing the book on, this book that I'm writing right now, the knowledge base is 98% full. And I had to kick some stuff out just to get under the 100% mark. And then, of course, you start asking it to do stuff. And within 20 minutes, it's saying, okay, you got 7 seconds or 7 questions left before you're banned until 2 in the morning. The timeouts go so fast when you have a huge knowledge base.
Yes,
We
yes.
call it Claude jail. But we have a team version of Claude, and we have I don't know, five or seven people on it. And so what I've had to do, like today, I'm in the process of writing that book, and I put people on notice. I said, just know I'm going to be borrowing your Claude license as soon as I get in jail. And so we just bounce from license to license to license to get it to go. You can do the same thing in ChatGPT with a custom GPT. It's just that you have
Yes.
to fine tune the writing style a whole lot more because Claude does a better job at copywriting. But Claude Sonnet 3.5 is amazing at copywriting. The new upgrade does a much better job at logic. But 4.0 on ChatGPT 4.0 and 401 preview are incredible
Yes.
in terms of logic and thinking through problems. And so what I like to teach people is not just use ChatGPT or Claude or any other LLM to write copy, but use it as a thought partner. Use it as somebody that'll help bounce off ideas and structure. Those are real powerful. Like for instance, I built a GPT that we call Bizzuka in-house counsel. And so it's a legal GPT. It has all of the information about our company, our founding date, our articles of incorporation, our tax ID numbers, our mailing addresses, billing contacts, web address, all that technical stuff. Plus, it's got details about our products and services and our history, et cetera. A company that I'm doing some work with sent me a legal agreement or a memorandum of understanding they want me to sign. So I just uploaded it into the Bazooka in-house counsel GPT, and I said, "Tell me what I need to look out for." And it just goes through this thing and says, "All right, well, you need to tighten this up. You need to tighten that up." And I was like, "Cool." And then it says, "You want me to write it for you?" I'm like, "Yeah." So it wrote it for me, but it's cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Very cool.
brilliant, and I think the key couple of key messages out of that for me, for you is one is that break it into components, right? So like
Mhm.
for me, I've got multiple projects, and I break those down. So I might have one for doing my LinkedIn posts. I might have one for doing general content that I'm writing, and when I say general, it's more like be specific, like a blog. Then I've got one for writing LinkedIn messages, etc. So break them down rather than having, like you said, a massive prompt with a whole lot of context. So I think that's definitely one. And then the other is, like you said, use different LLMs for different purposes.
Mhm.
For me, if I'm looking at, yes, my strategy, my business plan, those type of things, I will do that in ChatGPT, and then with especially the reasoning, the one and the etc., the new
Mhm.
versions. And then if I'm writing content, yes, Claude, and feed off each other as well. Like don't sort of keep them separate. And just quickly on that, like there's some aggregators out there. There's I think there's Poe. I think there's I've used Monica in the past. Have you had any experience of using, an aggregator that's got both of them in it versus using the platform itself? Is there any, pros and
Yeah,
cons of that?
yeah. A couple of things. Poe, like you mentioned, there's another tool. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I don't know whether it's Skynet AI or I have to remember a fellow that works with us. It's one of the ventures he's involved in.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because in the same context window, you can bounce from model to model, which is very, very helpful. So there are pros and cons to that approach.
Yes.
It definitely helps you, in terms of writing or analytical work, et cetera. The thing that I wish they'd all get together and just kind of merge and give me one powerful thing, right?
Yes.
But like I use Perplexity to go out on the web and pull in a lot of resources and stuff. I use the little web, feature inside of Chat GPT now. It does a pretty good job of pulling in stuff. The thing that I really am enjoying about Chat GPT is that in the same context window, as long as I started in a plain context window, I can call in a GPT and I can call in a multiple. I probably have 25, custom GPTs in there, but I'll have one that I'll give you an example. All right. So right now I have Fathom inside of this meeting.
Yes.
Fathom's going to take a transcript of it. But imagine if this was a sales call, right? You and I are having a strategy call. You're telling me about your problems and all that stuff, and I'm trying to understand where you're coming up short, what you're struggling with, how I can help. I'm going to take that transcript
Yes.
and the traditional thinking is, oh, take the transcript, give yourself a nice to-do list and a follow-up, blah, blah, blah. But you still have to make a proposal, right? And you have to send that proposal off and see if it's in alignment with what that person wanted. You should have a GPT that has all your sales information, a really detailed description about your products and service and everything else, so that you can take the transcript and you run it in that GPT, and then it pulls out from the transcript a proposal that matches exactly what that person was talking about. It first says, here's what we discussed, here's the problems you have, here's how we're going to solve it, right? Okay, that's one thing. The next thing you can do, and this is a two-part GPT that I created. The first part is to analyze the transcript and create a disc profile and an Enneagram on the prospect.
Yes.
So I want to know what's going on in that person's mind based on the transcript. What are they thinking? How do they think? How do they process um, things? Et cetera. So it'll take that disc profile and Enneagram and kind of merge it into a GPT version of it. Then I take that profile. That's now my persona. I take that profile, create it as a persona document, and then I go into a different GPT that I have that says, I'm going to upload a persona. I want you to be that persona.
Yes.
And then I want you to evaluate the proposal that I'm putting in front of you. And I want you to tell me what you don't understand or where it's off or where you disagree, right?
Brilliant.
And so now you're basically having a role play with the GPT after they've analyzed your deep conversations with your prospect. It really helps you fine tune your proposal like you wouldn't believe. I have this process that loops. I have it analyze it, tell me where it has questions, and then rewrite it to answer the questions, and then analyze it again as the persona. Tell me where it's got questions, rewrite it another time. And so by the time it's finished, it goes through 3 iterations and it rewrites the proposal to really address any objections or questions that the prospect might have. And by the time I have it now, I present it to somebody, it goes over pretty well.
Yeah,
So,
that's brilliant. That's a great build. So I've got a shout out to Jed, who's one of my clients. He's a Zoho partner, and he's been using it. So he's got a lot of people, and Jed was no different to this. Just write a SOW, right? Statement of works, and it's very technical and it's very boring, but it doesn't really
yeah,
address what's the problems, then what's the impact, and then what do they need, right? So if you look at a
yeah,
proposal from that sort of holistic perspective. We created a proposal template. So what he does now is takes the recording, the transcripts, and he gets all the key information and automatically puts it in the proposal. So it's writing 80% of the proposal for him from the call that he's had, and then
yeah,
etc. But what we haven't done, and Jed, if you're listening to this, John's spot on here, is then do that extra step that you did where you actually get the persona to basically behave and give you feedback on the proposal. I think that's brilliant. Haven't done it. The other one quickly, John, which you mentioned, but is sales calls. So, I used
yeah,
to review my client sales calls. I still do that the first time, but what I've done now is set up a prompt where I give them that prompt or that project in Claude, and they put in their sales transcript. And then using my methodology, we're reviewing their sales call and giving them an action plan on what they can improve, because most of you aren't converting how you want and you wonder why. Well, why not use AI to actually help you close that gap, right? Because I can't help everybody, but what I can do is give you a prompt to help you help yourself. And I think that's, like John and I could talk for hours here, and we'll sort of, I'll ask you a couple more questions, John, before we wrap it up. But the most important thing is follow John, because what John knows now will change in a week, in 2 weeks, etc. Right? Because we're all learning. This is all new. But I love the point you made, John, about being AI first. Like for me and my team is we don't do anything without using some form of AI, whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, whatever you're using. I'm using that to supplement me, right? No different to when I'm old enough, and John, I think you might be as well, was when before we had Excel, right? We had to do everything manually, and
Right.
all of a sudden we got Excel. You didn't go back to paper, right? And I think if you make the shift to AI, you don't go back.
Yeah,
And
you can't. I mean,
you
like
can't. You can't.
you're taking tasks that used to take, 3, 4, or 5 days, and you're doing them in 20 minutes. Yeah, there's just no way.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's like you're dead right. Like, and the thing is, the hardest thing is we could give you a million scenarios of how you use it. I think the
Mhm.
ultimate thing is use it in every scenario,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's not something that this can't help you. And we've all heard the joke that AI won't replace doctors, but doctors using AI will replace doctors who don't, right? And that's the same thing. The question I want to ask you is this, to me, the evolution for me is that I've got a lot of content. So I'm using AI internally. Now I'm using it with my team. But the real key thing is that I've got a lot of content, a lot of playbooks that are dumb in some respect, that they don't have any prompts in them, right? What's been your experience of now going a step further where you go into the client's world and you're actually got your own prompts, you've got your own projects or whatever that you're giving your clients to help them do work better, rather than historically what we've done is a Google document or a Word document that we've sent across.
Yeah. Well, what we do is we use Notion as a database for all of our prompts. And inside of the Notion database, we have a multitude of fields, and one of them is the status of the prompt. And so we start from it was requested to where it's being developed to where it's approved and now it's ready for distribution. But it also has all of it, not only has the prompt, but it would have up to 7 follow-up prompts so that it becomes a sequence. But it also tells you what AI tool it's best for. It could be good for both, good for several. It could be, hey, this only works in Chat GPT under 401 preview, right?
Yes.
So we have it all defined in there. And because we kind of like eat our own dog food, right? So we're always building these things and we're always refining them. And so our prompt library grows and grows and grows. So when somebody goes through our training or they become a client, we give them a copy of that database, but we pull out stuff that's personal, but it gives them a heck of a head start. And then we go into piece by piece and say, okay, we're going to replace this block with your block. Here's the prompt to create your block. Here's the prompt to create your document. We go and we fine tune it. And that's how we can get them up to speed so much faster, right? But we first have to teach them the principles of scalable prompt engineering, which is technical
Yes.
sounding. Engineering gives it that I don't know, that feel that you got to have a master's to figure it out. But it's just scalable prompting.
Yeah.
It's just a different way to structure something. So once they learn the foundational principles of that, they'll learn that in a day. And we use this thing called the AI strategy canvas so that they can see it visually and they know now, I need to go through these steps. When they do that, everything gels, everything makes sense, and things change. That's it. I want to make sure they go from 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds. That's my goal, right?
I think the certainly for us, we've done a similar thing. We've just used Airtable versus Notion, but I think
Mm-hmm.
capturing this. But I think prompting gets. I think it's probably overused. Prompting is really just communicating, right?
Yeah.
And most of you are very good at communicating. So just replace the word prompt with communication. It's like, how are you communicating? No different to how you communicate to one of your real team members. This is just a virtual team member that you're communicating with. So, but you did talk about variables and prompt. containers. I must admit, I get a little confused by that. So, my
Mhm.
last question before we go to the rapid fire is that, what does a variable mean, and how can we use it in our prompts?
Gotcha. Let's take one. Let's take the persona, since that's the first one that we always work with people.
Yes.
See that if you look at the AI strategy canvas, and you go to the podcast with Stelzner on Michael Stelzner's podcast, I go through every block of the strategy canvas. And by the way, if people want to get it, they can go to bazooka.com/AI-strategy-canvas, and they can get a copy of it. But
Yes.
anyway, most people just dive into the request and they just start asking ChatGPT or Claude to do something. We want them to take it step by step, so the request is the last thing you do. Now,
Yeah.
if you think about it, those things stack up. So I want to tell it what to do at the end, but I want to give it information up at the front. So if I take the persona, and let's call everything about the persona a container,
Yes.
that could be a paragraph, right? But I want to start it by saying, okay, here's persona. And then I want to end it by giving it a slash persona. So it looks like HTML, but it's not. I'm not giving it all the bracketing and all that stuff. It looks that way. And all GPTs are intelligent enough to go, oh, you started up here with a colon and here you ended it with a slash. That must be a container. Right.
Yeah.
So inside of that container, I could have paragraphs, or I could have variables in the container. And a variable might be niche, avatar, desires, fears, frustrations. Okay. So those would be variables. Likewise, if I'm writing a style container that tells it what the writing style would be, I might have a variable that's humor, a variable for sentence length, a variable for burst, for perplexity and burstiness and directness, call to action. I could have a bunch of variables in there. And if I start to see it getting squirrely, what's cool is you can just say, hey, what variable is making you do this? And
Right.
it'll say such and such. Because I would say, look, why are you using so many long sentences?
Yes.
What variable can I adjust to get you to do that? And it'll go, okay, well, you got this one saying this, knock it down to this level. Instead of you having it at a 6, pull it down to a 3. You
Yes.
know, if you're talking like a pirate, it's because your humor level is set at a 9, pull it down to here, but you also have a roll, blah, blah, blah. It'll tell you what to calibrate. That's why we like variables.
Yeah, gotcha. Brilliant, brilliant. Like I said, just reminded episode talking to, or you've been listening to John Munsell. And John, I'll give you all the details in the outro of how you get in contact with John, etc. But the most important thing is that we're all learning this, right? We're all learning it together. But some people are dedicated to it. So you and I have got day jobs. We've got clients. We've got other things. John, this is John's day job, right? So that's why we brought John on, because he is an expert in this area and he will continue to learn at a faster pace than us. So then we can benefit from following John and getting that knowledge going through. But AI first is I think the catchphrase for your opportunity post this podcast. But what we're going to do now is just pause for our sponsors to thank them, and then we're going to go into the rapid fire. Ever spotted your dream client on LinkedIn only to find yourself bogged down in tedious data transfer at the expense of building that critical relationship? Say goodbye to manual tasks and hello to efficiency with Surfy, S-U-R-F-E. Surfy transforms you from a virtual assistant into a sales pro by seamlessly capturing, syncing, and enriching contacts from LinkedIn into your preferred sales platform, be it Salesforce, HubSpot, Pipedrive, Copper, or even Google Sheets, all in one single click. Imagine reclaiming those precious hours spent on data entry and redirecting them towards nurturing valuable connections and closing deals, which we all love to do. With Surfy, it's not just a dream, it's your new reality. Ready to invest your sales time where it truly matters? Try Surfy today by visiting our resource page at paulhigginsmentoring.com/resources and clicking on Surfy. Elevate your sales game with Surfy, because your success starts after the click. So, John, rapid fire. I'm going to ask you 4 questions, get 4 rapid responses. So the first one, what are some of the daily habits you do outside of your AI that we've spoken about in the podcast to help scale Bazooka?
Daily habits, man. I wish I had a great answer for that, but I'm moving so fast that I would hate to admit it, but I'm disorganized. We have a morning meeting every morning. I know those are supposed to be 15 minutes. Ours are usually an hour. We're going through all sorts of stuff. I always wake up at 5. I always work out in the morning. I always have my brain octane oil in my coffee to get going. And then I have my 8 o'clock meeting. And then after that, all hell breaks loose. So
Great, great. You
those are
you
my
like you
rituals.
like all of us. The second is, where do you go to learn yourself? Because this is a waterfall. You're going to then share it with us, but where do you go to sort of find more about AI at the
Yeah,
moment?
great question. So I'm in several AI masterminds. I host one of my own. So I like sharing with other experts. There are people that I listen to. I'm like anybody else. I'm watching YouTube videos to see if there's anything really new. I
Yep.
don't have time to keep up with everything, so I subscribe to a lot of AI newsletters, and we digest those newsletters with AI and pull out stuff that would be of interest to us. So yeah, I think the main thing I'm doing is just I work with it a
Yep.
solid 8 hours a day. I'm usually working, I call it half days. It's usually from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day.
Yeah.
Normally I'm working 14 hours, but I use it all the time,
Yeah. Great.
all the
And
time.
if we could grant you one wish for bazooka.com, what would that be?
Oh, I need a CEO. That's a weird one, right? You didn't expect me to see that as the CEO. No, I'm actively looking for a CEO because I know what my strengths are. I've run companies for the last 30 years and I'm essentially back in startup mode. And I
Yes.
know that I could be running a whole lot faster if I focused on where I'm really good, where my zone of genius is, and
Yes.
brought in a CEO that was passionate about AI. That would be my one wish.
Well, there
I
you
know
go.
it's a weird one, but that's
If
it.
you're that person, send John whatever the modern version of a resume is. The last question is, what do you know now about this world of AI that you wish you had known sooner?
That's, I don't really have a good answer for that because I've been using it for so long and it's been changing that you can't really retroactively say, oh, I wish I'd have known that now because it wasn't available or it wasn't common knowledge. I think the only way I would probably answer that is I wish I knew just how fast things were going to move so that I didn't spend a lot of time on certain exercises that would yield. I would burn a lot of time working on something that was going to be fixed in a day, right? But but here's the thing. This is the one thing that I learned by, and you probably survived the dot-com bomb as well. The one thing that I learned from that debacle was don't invest your time in a new technology until, and this is my own philosophy, until they've probably received a Series B round of funding. If they're on friends and family or, maybe even Series A, I hesitate to spend a lot of time on that tool. Like, for instance, these automation tools that are being built,
Yes.
right? You could build all these really complex automations, and that thing will go bankrupt because, Y Combinator or somebody else decided, okay, this one's the winner. We're going to let this one die.
Yes.
That's my big fear is do I spend a whole lot of time of my clients and ours building out automations in a tool that's just going to die because the venture funds have already made their choices to who's going to live.
Yeah, well, and just very quickly on that, back in my Coca-Cola days, like, normally the first one or two own the majority of the category and the share, right? So it's
Yeah,
sort of similar to this. So I think, another way of looking at it is back the people that have got the funding because they're going to stay ahead versus, yeah, like you said, some thinks they can out of their garage create something that'll overplace that. There's nothing in this like compounded learning. And, I think the big guys will still be the big guys. So I think that's a much safer bet than the
yeah,
AppSumo, who I love as a platform, but all the million AppSumo small ones that come out. Yeah, just dive into the tools. It's less about the tool, it's more about how you use the tool, which is going to really set you apart. But look, it's been brilliant having you on, John. Like I said, Bizzuka, BIZZUKA.com. is where you're going to find more about John. John's got a book coming out, which is Ingrain. If you go to bizzuka.com/ingrain, INGRAIN. Sorry about my Australian accent. You can find more about it then. But follow John because there's a lot more great stuff that's going to be coming out of him for you as a small business owner on AI. So, John, once again, thanks for taking a break from writing your book to speak to us today.
Well, Paul, it's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. And man, I can't wait to watch all your other interviews. I've been watching a bunch, binge watched over the last couple of days. So you do great work. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
What a great interview with John. Obviously, it went a little bit longer just because it's so topical and John is such an expert. But reach out to him on LinkedIn. The link will be in the show notes, and say that you heard him here or saw him on the Paul Higgins show, and ask him questions, right? He is a wealth of information. Also share it with your peers because they need to be at the cutting edge of AI, right? It's not time to be waiting. It's time to move, and it's time to move right now. You can also watch us, as I said, on the Paul Higgins YouTube channel, Paul Higgins Mentoring. And also, don't forget to go and check out John's book. It's bizzuka.com/ingrain, and you can get early access to that, or it might even be published by the time it's going. I interrupted John in writing the book, but he will be finishing it and getting it out. But yeah, I hope you've really enjoyed this podcast, and reach out to me and let me know what you've learned. Thank you. Time for action. Let me know what you implemented from the show. I promise to respond. Plus, get the Tech Consultants Roadmap at paulhigginsmentoring.com/roadmap.